Hi, what's up? It's me, DaPurpleSharpie, and I just want to give y'all an update real quick. First things first, let's address the elephant inside of the room. A lot of people were expecting me to have already uploaded my web series pilot. I had got a bunch of subscribers. That's probably you coming here from Triple KO, where I did an episode with Justin Wong, Matt McMuscles, and Maximilian talking about platform fighters. At the end of that episode, I let everyone know that I was actually coming out with a web series pilot that I had written and created and actually directed and basically starred in. That is still coming out. I had expected to put it out literally 2 weeks ago on the same day as Multiverse is coming out. It did not, unfortunately, happen that way. Another small update, I actually got a puppy. Come here, baby girl. Come here. Good girl. Look at her. Her name is Luna and she's teething. She's such a little gremlin. Sit. Good girl. She is absolutely adorable and also a very big handful, and also one of the reasons why the episode was delayed. It's just been a lot more work than I expected taking care of her, and it's turned into something that I didn't expect it to, but I appreciate y'all being patient with me. Secondly, I just want to let you know Sony paid me to say this specific ad. Today is the very last day of Sony's Days of Play, which is an awesome opportunity for all gamers across the PlayStation ecosystem to receive amazing deals, collectibles, and just general cool vibes. If you haven't already, go to PlayStation.com and check out some of the amazing collectibles and deals that they have on this final day of Sony's Days of Play. Last but not least, a lot of people are looking for consistent updates, which I found out from my very last upload. You want these consistent updates, you want to hear and see from me more than just once every couple of months. I get it. If you're looking for stuff like that, look no further. I do have a bi-weekly podcast that's every 2 weeks called FGC Cast that I actually host with Saki Sakura. The remainder of this video is actually going to be from a series that I made specifically for that podcast called Late Night Sets with your host, DaPurpleSharpie, where I actually interview several members of what I consider the next generation of the fighting game community, and I talk to players, organizers, developers, and just kind of get a vibe for like what their journey has been like for them, and also hopefully make my audience more knowledgeable about the different opportunities there are inside of fighting games. This specific episode and this specific interview is actually with Dan Fornace, the creators of Rival of Aether and the newly announced and released Rivals of Aether 2, which is a really cool platform fighter, completely and totally self-published by them. Without any further ado, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for supporting, and enjoy the rest of Late Night Sets with your host, DaPurpleSharpie. Hello, dear viewer. Welcome to yet another episode of Late Night Sets with your host, DaPurpleSharpie. I am here today with game developer and creator for Rivals of Aether and the newly released beta of Rivals 2, Dan Fornace. How are you doing today, Dan?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking. Let's go ahead and just get straight into it. Knowing that you have been a game developer for now going on almost 12 years, you actually started at Microsoft Studio and you worked on some really big projects, including but not limited to Killer Instinct, Dust, Mark of the Ninja. Tell us a little bit more about your time working at Microsoft Studios.
Yeah, so I got into Microsoft Studios through their college hire program at the time. I graduated from Drexel University in Philly and went right into work out here in Seattle. The very first team I got assigned to was the XBLA team, because it was back in the Xbox 360 days. That was like their digital arcade games. And it was awesome because I got put on that team as a designer. As Xbox was publishing a lot of those games, I was doing design support, right? And what that meant varied between every game that I did, but it also meant that I was credited on, I don't know, a lot of games, like more than probably around 30 games total in the 3 years I was there. And on a game that I really enjoyed working on, like Trials Evolution, the main thing I did was I just got to play it a lot, and then I got to give them feedback on the levels, and I ranked them all in terms of difficulty and things like that. And then they would change the order based on, feedback, being like, hey, we want, the ends of chapters to feel rewarding, things like that. Once I got put on Killer Instinct, so that was the second half of the time I was at Microsoft, started to have a bit more responsibility. So on that game, I was collecting feedback from a lot of designers at Microsoft, Ken Law being one of them, who was a couple levels up for me as a principal designer there. And then I also got to work on the game as well. So I worked with Double Helix, went down to their office, did a lot of work on designing like tutorials and things like that. So that was a pretty great game to help leverage to go indie after that, because I learned a lot about fighting games from Killer Instinct.
Double Helix and Iron Galaxies are both kind of renowned for not only their game engines, but also the mechanics that they utilized inside of not only Killer Instinct, but other games such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a few other projects, which you ultimately used inside of several projects that you have. You created a PC version of a Game Boy kind of esque game for Super Smash Brothers. Do you want to talk very briefly about that project?
Yeah, so that game was called Super Smash Land. And I was doing that kind of right before I got hired. That was like my big portfolio piece that I think got me, an interview potentially at Microsoft, because that game had, made its way to Kotaku and Joystick at the time as like a fan game that I was doing. That game was an evolution of kind of what I had been doing in my free time even before college. So that game was my senior year of college. I was making it. But before that, I had made a lot of projects in Game Maker where I kept trying to recreate Smash Brothers, just because since the first one, since 1999, I was kind of obsessed with it. The one before Super Smash Land was called The Lord of the Smash, and it was Lord of the Rings characters. I was editing Dragon Ball Legendary Super Warrior Sprites, which was a Game Boy Color game that was like a card game. And the backgrounds were edited from another game I played on PC called Jazz Jackrabbit 2. So the whole game was just like...
I actually played that game. I played that game coming up. It had the regular Jazz Jackrabbit, and then it had the green one, and it was like a little platformer level before like Metroidvanias were a big... You played that? That's so cool. I'm sorry. Please continue.
When I was first found Game Maker, which was years ago, I was also doing level editing in Jazz Jackrabbit, because that game had a really awesome level editor and you can make your own stuff. So I would make levels for my friends, and initially we would all just be sitting around one keyboard trying to get 4 people to be able to play. Then we had like USB controllers we would use. So that game kind of helped me want to do more with kind of game development. And I found Game Maker like version 4, which would have been like probably in like the year 2000 is when I first started messing with it, just kind of on my own. And then after that, I made a couple different games, in high school and actually junior high is when I started making stuff. But I kept trying to make Smash Brothers. That was like the game that I really was trying to build, because I just loved, the couch party aspect of it. I loved like making stuff for my friends. So the engine of Super Smash Land, a lot of people think I kind of just made that platform fighter, but it was actually like already like my 4th attempt at one was Super Smash Land. So then that engine became Rivals of Aether, which was like my 5th attempt. And I didn't really have like anyone, kind of from the industry or anything telling me like how to set things up. It was mostly trial and error. And also just like each time I tried, the project became more and more unwieldy. So I remember like when in Rivals of Aether, eventually I had people kind of come in and have to work with it. And they thought like somebody had kind of told me how to set it up, or had looked at, Smashes. I had like looked at Brawl or something. Once they started modding it, they had access to like kind of how Windows and attack data was all set up. And I was like, I just eventually I had to do it this way because there was like no way to sustain it. So that is how the Rivals engine came to be, is just through a lot of iteration, basically.
That's really, really interesting. I want to touch base on something that you said earlier inside of that question, specifically that obviously a lot of games have influenced your development and understanding of games at its core. I actually want to talk about a project that you worked on from 2011 to 2013, Elementals. Or I should say Elementimals, which was actually based off of a game from Final Fantasy VIII called Triple Triad, which was originally inspired by Magic the Gathering. It's a 3x3 card-based game that kind of infuses the general understanding of like tic-tac-toe, which once again, Triple Triad utilized, but it adds a certain flavor of it by adding elemental twists on it. It has a very low iteration time, and it's still currently available on a website that you actually host. Talk to us a little bit more about that project and what you ended up taking away from it.
Yeah, so Elementimals is actually like a pretty critical part of Rivals not just development, but like the lore all up. Because when I started Rivals, I was basically just combining the world not the world because it was a pretty small game, but like the characters in the world from Elementimals, and the fact that I restricted it to 4 elements because that's how the game was designed, with like kind of Super Smash Land, like the gameplay and the engine. So like even Super Smash Land, like I didn't have ledges, simplified a lot of mechanics. So Rivals was kind of like that, but building on it, almost like a sequel to Super Smash Land. But Elementimals ended up becoming an even bigger deal because it went full circle. So that inspired Rivals. But then back in 2018, 2019, we worked with the team Taco Boy Studios to have them make a spin-off for us called Creatures of Aether. And that game, we ran it with live updates going from 2021 or 2020 to the end of 2021. So a little over a year, we ran it. And that was like an evolution of Elementimals. So it's called Creatures of Aether. It was for mobile. You can get it on Steam. So that game is also still available, but we just haven't updated it since the end of 2021. That game took the triple triad formula and went even further. So we like upped it to a 4x4 board, and we added like heroes basically. So like all the characters from Rivals are like these hero cards, and you know, a lot of inspiration from Hearthstone as well. And kind of just like made our own competitive card game. And Creatures, I still love to this day. The only reason we kind of stopped updating it was because it was costing us more to run the live service than the game was making, which as a business is not really sustainable, especially as a side game. I think like the biggest thing I learned is like, if you are an indie studio and you do want to, you know, have multiple games, I think your main game can be a service where you just keep updating and keep adding stuff. But any side projects, you should definitely be thinking they are release and that's it, you know, just patches, maybe a couple updates, a couple DLC. So that's the path that we did for our next spin-off was Dungeons of Aether, which is just a $15 game that you can get on Steam and Switch, and then you can also get it on mobile now. And that's like a story game that kind of adds to the universe. But yeah, the big thing is that we took away is, one, I still kind of love Triple Triad and Final Fantasy, and 2 is don't try to do a free-to-play service spin-off because it's too hard to maintain both.
It's very difficult, and it's been absolutely amplified by multiple independent studios that I've had the pleasure of speaking with, how difficult it is to make spin-offs and support those spin-offs. But ultimately, when you have a passion for game design, sometimes things get a life of their own and they have to be made, you know, just to satiate that itch. You actually, earlier this year, specifically on April 1st, paid homage to another project that you made based off the Rivals of Aether's franchise. Do you want to talk about that project very, very briefly?
Yeah, Lovers of Aether was our first spin-off for Rivals, right? Came out in 2019, I believe. That project's hilarious because around September the year before, we talked about how funny it would be. And then really pushing it on our team was Mark Nelson, our concept artist. And he had just done like 1 or 2 characters in that style, and then joked about doing a visual novel. So then as the year was wrapping up, like we really wanted to do one, but we didn't really have a feasible way because all our team was focused. We were still a small team, under 10 people at that time, all focused on Rivals of Aether. So I asked around my like indie friends if 1, anyone was doing anything with the visual novel, and 2, if I could like hire someone to like basically collab with us and do one. And I actually came across Justin, who's ASCII Soft, who made the game Katana Zero. He was just in Game Maker at the time, like kind of developing a visual novel engine, mostly for his own projects, but he was like thinking about also, you know, extending it outward and using it as an engine as well. So I was like, sure, like I'd love to be the guinea pig. Can we work on this? Like he had to finish it to even do Lovers, but him and his friends, and then we also, you know, worked with his friends who they ended up forming a temporary team name. It was like Pizza Guy something. You'd have to look at our reveal trailer to see what they called themselves.
As they often do. Yes.
Yeah. They did all the writing. So like the characters and the interactions, like the biggest thing we did was I felt bad because I felt like I was back at Microsoft, but I was Microsoft. Like we were just kind of not like censoring a little bit in terms of like, okay, we can't we can't go this extreme, right? Like we can't have Analyst like saying this because he still needs to be a character in Rivals going forward. So we had to like temper some of their crazy ideas, but they got, I would say like 90% of it in. So if you go play that game, it's free, it's on Steam, it's on mobile. There's a lot of cool jokes and a lot of cool stories, and a lot of those ideas came from Justin and his team.
So I'd actually like to now pull the conversation to the game we've been kind of mentioning and talking about spinoffs, but ultimately one of the biggest projects to kind of launch your studio, Aether Studios, which is Rivals of Aether. That was a game that was completely created by yourself, but obviously you do have a team also working on it. Talk to me about how all of these past projects you worked on kind of culminated in this love to platform fighters. Or I should call it relatively a love story to your time playing and competing with platform fighters.
Yeah, for sure. So like you mentioned, the game that did start out from the very first day. It was basically a 2-person team. It was me and Flashy Goodness, who was the original composer for Rivals, and he's still working today through ResoForce on Rivals 2. I basically got us up. I worked on it for like 4 or 5 months, got us up to a trailer, which you can still find online. It's the Orcane and Zetaburn trailer. So that is all my art.
Very, very well designed, by the way. I did watch the original trailer for the 1.0. Beautiful, beautiful notes, fantastic timing. The music is very, very hype and very endearing. I come from the Newgrounds era, and it definitely hit me as one of those like front page Flash games that I'm going to spend the next 3 months playing with my friends,
Yeah, thank you. So that was like twofold. One, I kind of wanted to show what we're working on, start hyping up the Smash community. Like I was not a type of person who, being like an indie one-man team was what was important to me. I've always been more concerned about like the game itself. So as soon as I released that trailer, I was going on Twitter to kind of ask for help. And the first area was definitely had to be art, because, I love doing pixel art, and that's I picked a pixel art style because that's what I thought we would be able to achieve as a team. But immediately I got, stage artists. I worked with Johan Vignette, who did a lot of the initial Rival stages. Eventually I met Elian, who took over all of our characters and was the main pixel artist on Rivals of Aether from 2015 all the way up, to now, today. Still, he's the main pixel artist for Rivals. And then the team grew from there. We got another programmer, Trevor, who's now the lead programmer on Rivals 2. We got a community manager, George Rogers, who I went to school with and basically, convinced him to leave his job and come in the game industry, which is a little terrifying. So yeah, pretty quickly I expanded, but that initial goal of kind of getting the project started and getting it out, I was kind of able to do it by myself. And like you said, kind of through the experience of making games and working in Game Maker.
Thanks PlayStation for sponsoring this video.
Bringing summer the right way with Sony's Days of Play. Gonna wake up, boot up, check out all the sales up on display. Rise of Ronin just for you. Maybe Marvel, Spider-Man 2. So come on now, hey, don't delay with Sony's Days of Play.
Join in Days of Play and celebrate play with exclusive rewards, deals, and experiences across PlayStation's platform. Daily prizes come through the Community Challenge, like Astrobot collectibles, and even the EAFC Esports Tournament.
It's June 12, 2024, don't wait anymore.
You not only had a very successful launch and ultimately lifespan for Rivals of Aether, but you also had quite a few collaborations in terms of DLC characters that you actually received from other indie teams. What decided ultimately how you picked what DLC characters you put into Rivals and your team put into Rivals, and what decided what their mechanics would look like and how true to form those characters would be inside of Rivals?
We had a lot of options, so especially for the second guest, we made a big list. But Ori was, I just wanted to do him from when I started the project. And I was still, as soon as I went indie, I remember I had a big Skype chat with Thomas, who ran Moon Studios. He was just giving me advice on how to go indie and how to kind of navigate that space, because I had worked on Ori and the Blind Forest at Microsoft, just giving them feedback over the years to a lot of their builds and stuff. I wanted to do Ori really bad, and he was like, yes. As soon as I started a platform fighter, he's like, I'm down, let's do it. But Ori, the character, is owned by Microsoft, so it was a process to get that as a guest character. But because I had worked at Microsoft, I was able to kind of contact old team members, and we were able to get Ori into the game, which I think was awesome. We even got to reveal Ori at E3 on the show floor at Microsoft's stage. This is something that, I kind of always remember as being super hype. And then in terms of how after Ori, like how did we land on Shovel Knight and how did we compare the guests? Gameplay was a big part of it, but honestly, the biggest thing was at that point, we had gone to events. So we had been to PAX, we had been to, like I said, E3. We had brought the game to a lot of stuff. It started to come down to relationships. I was at a lot of the same events as Yacht Club Games, and we would always talk, and they would jokingly be like, hey, Shovel Knight's going to be your other guest, right? Because once Ori was revealed, we had said we're doing another guest. And eventually I was like, obviously all our fans wanted Shovel Knight. We tried different ideas in our head of what we wanted the moveset to be. But once we got it down to like collecting gems and buying upgrades, that was really exciting for us. So then that's when we pushed forward with Shovel Knight.
I just want to congratulate you, not only yourself, but also Rival Studios as a whole, for the amount of indie support that you give, not only in terms of the fighting game space, but also just in general. That's something that we've seen very frequently with other indie teams. Most notably, I come from the Skullgirls community. I saw it a lot with Lab Zero and Future Club devs, and I just want to say it's absolutely commendable the way that independent teams, especially inside of the game space, all kind of stick together and work together to make things possible for their specific and communities. But I do want to go ahead and get started with the juiciest question of all time, Rivals of Aether 2. You actually kickstarted it. The original goal for the Kickstarter was $200,000, which in and of itself is a relatively low amount of money for a project of the scale that you were attempting to do. You actually ended up raising over $1 million. I believe it's like a couple of $100,000 over that. Talk to me about the decision to kickstart this project as opposed to going to publishers.
Rivals of Aether, we found success kind of through our competitive scene, right? And building it up. And we definitely got a lot of fans. I think everyone in the Smash community knew us, but it wasn't until around 2019 when we added Steam Workshop that we kind of were able to get more financial legs off of Rivals. I think like that really extended the lifespan of the game, but also got a lot of new faces. And it really became that Steam was our, our main platform. Like before, it was always our main platform. Like we had on Xbox, even the game actually isn't even up to date with Steam and Switch because of what ended up happening with our netcode. We overhauled it from our previous, and we're not able to get it working on Xbox. So Steam, kind of was our forefront, but especially with Workshop. But the success, from Steam Workshop enabled us to kind of expand the team, especially in 2020. We had a really great year in that we put out the definitive edition, so that made the game go from 15 to 30 on Steam. We also launched it on Switch that year. So with that funds, we kind of immediately said, okay, we have a shot to kind of challenge Smash, which is basically impossible as a team, but we wanted to do it anyway. So we decided to start spinning up a team, and we knew like 3D obviously was going to be bigger, more expensive, but it still started really small. It actually started just Trevor. We had a 3D modeler, Mafu, on our team, and a tech artist, Corey. At the end of 2020 to April 2021, it was really those three. And then we started expanding the team from there. One of the reasons we were thinking Kickstarter is the team got up around 25, I think close to 30 people at our biggest. Now we're back down between 20 and 25, but that's a lot more expensive than what Rivals was to run a team that large, even remote. It's a lot. So we started pitching, right? We started going, hey, maybe we can get an investor, maybe we can get a publisher. That would help us kind of make the game that we want to make if we want to compete against Smash, especially in a 3D game. We pitched for 2.5 years to all kinds, anyone who would listen. We had like some, interest, but never really ones that would fit, what we want to do with our game. So we ended up kind of falling into Kickstarter because that was kind of the only avenue left, especially because as good as Rivals did in 2020, it launched in 2015. So it's not bad or anything, but it's making less money, but the team size was increasing. We kickstarted it for $200K, not because, that's how much the game costs to make, but that's because we were adding on to what Rivals makes, right? And we thought, $200K was like kind of the bare minimum, but we actually, if you looked at our stretch goals, we're saying, okay, well, at $1 million, we can get these many characters. And then at 2 million, we can add these features like ranked and other things. I think we went up to 3 million. We were like, hey, we could get a single player at launch because, we had people working on single player, and we were looking at hiring more because that's what it was going to take.
Yeah.
because we didn't hit that, we basically said, okay, story mode, we're going to pause it. We're going to make sure that we get the game out. And then, if we're successful, that's when we'll, redevote resources back to something like that. So yeah, that's why we set the goal low, but we also knew like, it's not up to the community to make this whole game, but we were hoping, going to the community to say like, we really need funds to get this out. And then you're the reason that, it exists in the first place because of all the money that, people have put into Rivals. Could you help us out some more and we can try to get Rivals 2 out the door?
Well, the community definitely showed up and showed out. I actually checked the Kickstarter. There was one tier, I believe, for something around the market of $10,000, I believe, and someone actually backed that. And their reward is having a dinner with you later this year in November of 2024. Once again, I want to congratulate your team for not only that Kickstarter amount, not only being amazing to other indies, but you all are actually on track for a late 2024 release, which congratulations, knock on wood, very, very difficult for especially independent game developers to implement there. Can you talk to us about how you've kind of navigated the roadmap for the release here and how you've kind of helped with your transparency in terms of community expectations and public expectations for the release schedule?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I was even saying during the Kickstarter is that we want to have these betas, obviously to get people in and playing because they paid for access, and that's really exciting, right? Like, hey, if you back the game, you can get in early and get to play these betas when the game is still changing frequently, right? Like, we think once the game's out, like, we don't expect to be doing, as often balance updates as something like a beta would have. But the other thing I really wanted is the people to see where we're at. Like, let's say, knock on wood, don't want to happen, but let's say we did get delayed out of 2024 for whatever reason. The goal is that everyone who backed on Kickstarter would know why, right? Because if we're doing these betas once a month and we put on our roadmap what we're going to hit, feature wise, if like something in the June beta, for example, doesn't work, and then we do it again in July and it doesn't work again, then our fans would know like, hey, like the game's playing great, like don't worry, for it to count as a launch or for us to have success, they need something like this to work. So that's a big thing for us, is just for people to be able to see it. And then the other thing that helps too is we have a lot of stuff we could do on the back end. There's a lot of features we'd love to make, a lot of stuff that we'd love to do for launch, but kind of laying out these monthly updates, that roadmap that you mentioned, it kind of forces our hand to be like, okay, well, these have to get done each month. If it does slip, our fans will know. But internal deadlines have been good in that, we kind of have a game that's fun to play that we started in 2020. But now as we get closer, these external deadlines are very helpful to kind of, really force us to get serious about releasing stuff.
I understand as well, this is your very first project inside of Unreal Engine 5 as opposed to Game Maker. So I'm wishing you all a very, 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 very positive launch on this new engine and, a very, very swift timeline through all of this. As a final question, I just want to ask, is there anybody that you personally like to thank or anybody in the team you'd like to shout out as someone or people that made it possible for you to get to this point inside of your development career?
Yeah, I think, our whole team. So like I said, we're up between 20 and 25 people now. So everyone who's worked on it thus far, we're super grateful. And even still, like we've had people who've come and gone. We've had like right now, for example, we actually don't have anyone kind of doing environments, right? Like we got 10 stages done. We had Ty Walker come into our team and Mason Buys, who did awesome work. But then in terms of our size, we were like, now that we have our 10 stages, we got to get this game out, and then we'll worry about stages after that. So it's very similar to Story. So everyone who's kind of worked on Rivals 2 in the last 4 years and has come and gone, like we're super grateful to all that work. And then in terms of my career, kind of one of the biggest influences goes back to Killer Instinct. I was lucky enough to work with James Goddard, who became the creative director on Microsoft's side for
Yes.
Killer Instinct. I think that was around the time that I left Microsoft. He was promoted into that, but he was also there doing design support with me, and he taught me a lot about fighting games. And I actually have like a Medium account, and I posted some articles, and I have one where I basically took what he taught me about silhouettes and made an article about it. So if you're interested in fighting game design, check out my Medium, because I have a couple different articles about design in general and the stuff that I learned from him.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much again for your insight, not only into the game development cycle for Rivals, but also the theory and understanding into what goes to making a good game. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of Late Night Sets with your host, DaPurpleSharpie. As always, you can support this specific episode by actually following my podcast, FGC Cast, on all platforms and leaving us a 5-star review on not only Apple Podcasts, but also on Spotify. It really helps. Well, gamers, as always, I'll see you offline.